Daniel chapter 2 is an interesting prophecy, one that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he was not going to let his magic practicing people, his spiritists, or whoever he was there, get off free. They had to not only tell him what he dreamt in his dream in Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel chapter 2, but they had to tell him the meaning. And so none of them could do that, but only one, and that was God's servant Daniel. The dream was from God, and only his servant would be able to deliver the message and the interpretation. And so that is what happened. This was a large statute that he saw, and he was told what it was. In verse 29 of Daniel chapter 2, he says, "As for you, O king, on your bed, your thoughts turn to what is to take place in the future, and a revealer of secrets has made known to you what is to happen." And so he was told what was to happen. And in verse 31 it says, "You, O king, were watching, and you saw an intense image. And that image, which was huge and extremely bright, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of that image was of fine gold. Its chest and its arms were of silver. Its abdomen and its thighs were of copper. The legs were of iron, and its feet were partly of iron, partly of clay. He looked on until a stone was cut out, not by hands, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and of clay and crushed them. At that time, the iron, the clay, the copper, the silver, and the gold were all together crushed and became like the chaff from the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a large mountain, and it filled the whole earth." So he saw this immense image, and it had these different metallic, the different parts of it had different types of metal, and Daniel helped him to appreciate what he had dreamed. So in verse 36 says, "This is the dream, and we will now tell the king its interpretation." Verse 37, it says, "You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the might, the strength, and the glory." In verse 38, "Into whose hand he has given men wherever they may dwell, as well as the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens, and whom he has made ruler over all of them. You yourself are the head of gold." So here Nebuchadnezzar being shown to be the head of the gold. So he didn't have to worry about that identification anymore. It was made. In verse 39, "But after you another kingdom will rise." So this is talking about kingdoms, not just a king, but a kingdom. And then as verse 39 says, "Then another kingdom, a third one of copper, will rule over the whole earth." And then verse 40, "As for the fourth kingdom, it will be strong like iron." So here it's talking about a succession of kingdoms. Even though Nebuchadnezzar was the king of that particular kingdom, after him would come another kingdom, and so forth. And as Daniel was helped once to appreciate in Daniel chapter 8, I think it is, of how Medo-Persia would take over Babylon, then it was Greece, and then we later learned that Rome took over Greece. In verse 41 it says, "And just as you saw the feet and the toes to be partly of clay, of a potter, and partly of iron, the kingdom will be divided, but some of the hardness of iron will be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, and so the kingdom will be partly strong and partly fragile. And just as you saw iron mixed with soft clay, they will be mixed with the people, and they will not stick together one to the other, just as iron does not mix with clay." So here we see a government that it's defined as partly iron, partly of clay. It will be divided. It will be fragile. It will be mixed with iron and clay, as we said, and it will be the soft clay represents the people, and that will be in there. And just like iron and clay doesn't mix, so are they divided. Which kingdom fits this description of divisive, fragile, mixed with the people? This kingdom is not just some regular kingdom. Like Nebuchadnezzar, whom God had given all the authority. In other words, what was Babylon back then? In verse 37, it says, "You, king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom of the might, the strength, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given men, wherever they dwell, as well as the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens, and whom he has made rule over all of them, you yourself are head of gold." So these kingdoms that would follow would have the same type of power, such as Medo-Persia, such as Greece, such as Rome. Who today has that kind of power over all the nations? That's America. That's America. And what is their slogan? Government by the people, of the people, for the people. Hope I'm quoting that right. Maybe I kind of messed it up. People are the power of this government. In other words, this government, the clay in there, the people, they have influence, they have power. And where do they, how do they use their power? They use their power by the vote. And they can vote people in, they can vote people out. Civilian people are brought into the government, and they have power, and they can stay in that power as long as the people vote for them to allow them to stay in there. And so they have the hardness of iron because they have a government, but at in that government, they have to be concerned about what the people think and what the people want in order to stay in power. And so the vote is very important. That's why many times you'll see, and we've seen in the history of America, how they try to influence the vote, control the vote, what they call gerrymandering, and many other different machinations they use to try to control the power of certain segments of society, to control the power of the vote. The name of the game, if you want to be in power in this government, you have to manipulate, you have to control, you have to influence the people to vote for you. You have to get as much of this clay in your bucket as possible so you can stay in power. But this clay that's in the feet, that controls what this feet does and how it walks about, you got to get the people to think what you want them to think. It's not about what's right. It's about getting the people whipped up into a frenzy to get as much of that clay in their bucket as possibly they can, to shape the clay into an elephant or to a donkey. You know, anytime humans have guns and division and so forth and these type of weapons, that's going to lead to conflict. That makes their situation very fragile, as the Bible says. These type of governments, you know, when you're going to run in propaganda campaigns and trying to get this clay in your bucket, it costs money. Billions and billions of dollars just to get people in office to be divided. So it's obvious who this last world power is. It's the United States with their 800 bases all over the world. Just like the Roman denarius was the currency of that time, the dollar is the currency of this time. Everything that happens in the United States affects the world everywhere. They're in the same place Nebuchadnezzar was, as he in Babylon was back then. So it tells us that we're in the last of the last days. Peter brought out in Acts chapter 2, verse 17, that the last days began in the first century. We're in the last of the last days, and that rock, as the Bible says, that hurricane of destruction will strike the feet of iron and clay. And the feet of iron and clay is the United States. The conclusion of the matter in Daniel 2, verse 44. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom and will never be destroyed. And this kingdom will not be passed on to any other people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, and it alone will stand forever.